In 2004, the head of the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, Ken Boston, said that e-assessment would touch the lives of everyone. In 2011, that isn't yet the case. While technology is used in marking, moderation and distribution of results, it is still not very prevalent in the examination room.
I think over the last decade, perhaps things haven't moved as fast as people expected. I think there was an expectation that technology would be at the core of learning and assessment by 2010, 2011, and actually that hasn't happened. I think that's probably because it's taken longer for technology to become embedded in the classroom, and as a consequence it's taken longer for that technology to transfer to assessment. So I think there have been some early successes with the use of e-portfolios, and there's been some success with computer-based testing, but arguably they're at the periphery, not at the core.
Cambridge Assessment predicts that over the next 10 to 15 years, the UK will continue to see a slow migration towards e-assessment in high-stakes examinations, with different subjects migrating at different paces.
We've made some advances. OCR now has 11 GCSE subjects that have computer-based test options, and there is some take-up, but the feedback from customers really is that they're too difficult to fit around the rest of the exam timetable. And with fewer opportunities for assessment in the future in GCSEs, it'll probably become more challenging.
Where we've seen most progress has been those forms of assessment where the tests are offered in what we would describe as high frequency but low volume. So the test sessions themselves occur very frequently, but the number of students engaged in any one of those test sessions might not number more than about 20 or 25 students. And in that context, the ability for a centre to accommodate an education institution to accommodate that volume is relatively easy.
I think the core issue with trying to advance technology adoption is the availability of the technology in schools and colleges. I think this is improving and has improved over time, but until it becomes routine and everyday for technology to be a core part of classroom delivery, I don't think it will become a natural way to assess things.
Technology plays a key part in the administrative process, with millions of exam papers being marked and moderated online every year.
With the introduction of technology, one of the things that's allowed us to do is to think very differently about location, because evidence is created once in a location. That evidence might not need to be transferred, because it is clearly possible to remotely interact with that evidence. Either that evidence is transferred digitally, but its source is not lost, or the door is opened remotely for people to come in and view that evidence based on some sort of sample moderation profile.
At the same time, we've got to be aware of what that assessment process for those assessors involves. And so we've been doing some work which is looking at how people feed back information to each other through a system, for a quality assurance system, and whether the technology helps them to do that or whether it actually interferes. So do they get too much information which interferes with the way that they feed back to other examiners?
A key factor in deciding technology's role in assessment is public trust. There's widespread use, particularly in the United States, of e-assessment for all sorts of professional exams. But in the UK, the public is more cautious about technology's role in assessment.
We're very careful to explain to people that when we talk about e-assessment, we're not necessarily talking about the computer trying to make the judgment about somebody. In some cases, if it's a very simple form of assessment, like a multiple choice test, the computer can do that as well as a human. In fact, the computer can probably do that more reliably than a human if you're talking about making assessments over thousands and thousands of papers of that type. If you're talking about assessment that requires a high degree of subjectivity and expertise, then where we use technology is to get that evidence from the student in front of the assessor.
It's becoming cheaper and easier for people across the world to access education through technology, yet not everybody is on an equal footing.
Although we are looking at what is broadly described as a digitally literate generation, it's not always the case that all of those children are as digitally literate as each other, or even have access to technology in quite the same comparable way.
And so therefore we have to be concerned about what is the baseline. We don't want to disadvantage somebody just because of their lack of experience. So therefore we've got to look at establishing a common benchmark and saying this is our minimal expectation of what we can expect them to have had experience of, and maybe schools are the best place for that.
The move to e-assessment is more likely to be a slow migration than a sudden revolution. But what principles should guide the introduction of these new technologies?
Can the technology enhance the procedure and add to its validity or not? And I think that's the real big question.
We are an assessment agency, so therefore our starting point for development of new qualifications or accreditation programmes is to understand what it is that we're wanting to assess.
And technology has a part to play in that, but not necessarily all of it. And I think we shouldn't get carried away by what we can do, but what we should do is the real question.